now is from outside of the city. It's amazing. Anya Parampil is actually from Washington State, right? And you live in New York. You live in DC, and she works with RT. I've done her show a few times. She is a anchor at RT, and it's one of the few places that I'm able to go on. I've been getting a lot of press that I really don't want, and the only place I can really talk honestly, and they don't box me in like Gary Melber does on MSNBC, is RT. I do RT, and I've done her show. And why don't we start? Go to you right now. How has it been for RT and for you? Cover? No, it's directional. Okay, Anya. So tell us about your experience covering Russiagate for RT.
Well, I guess I would start by saying that I joined RT in 2014. Which, if you remember, was the year that an anchor named Liz Wall kind of staged a resignation live on television in light of what was going on in Ukraine, what she described as Putin's invasion of Crimea, and claimed that she was working for a network that pushed propaganda that she was uncomfortable with. She'd, of course, been working for the network for 3 years, and apparently had just figured out what the R in RT stood for. And I joined actually that week. And Max can talk about this a little bit more, but that resignation really was a turning point in RT because it was the first time I think that it had been put on the national map as a Putin influencing propaganda network. Now, after she went on to, after she staged this resignation, suddenly everyone was talking about RT in a way that they never had before. People were paying attention to RT, and I think it was because RT does provide another perspective on international affairs. And for the first time after what happened in Ukraine, I think the US government was actually threatened by allowing this different perspective airtime. And so since then, in the 4 years that I've worked for RT since, you know, mainly covering issues of criminal justice here in the United States. You know, one of the main things I covered was the Black Lives Matter movement. And the uprising in Baltimore, people upset with police killings, you know, things that now, according to the director of the Office of National Intelligence, is a Russian influencing operation. You know, to talk about Black Lives Matter and the adverse health effects of fracking, according to our government, is something that Putin directs us to do. I can tell you that's, from my experience, that's not true. What you have to understand about RT, what you have to understand about RT is that if you came into my office, you would meet many Americans like me who have left-wing politics and want to talk about these issues, actually believe in a different kind of foreign policy, anti-imperialist foreign policy. We don't like to see the United States bossing around, you know, trying to get its way in the Middle East when it comes to Syria, Libya, things like that. We actually believe in this and want to talk about it, and we're told that we're doing this at the direction of a foreign government. And it's been difficult because as a result of the ODNI report, which I'm sure we'll talk more about later, RT was actually forced to register as a foreign agent lobbying group, something the US government has never asked a foreign media outlet to do. I mean, what is the difference between what we do and what Al Jazeera or the BBC or France 24, any other international network that operates in this country does? We're the only one that was forced to register under FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. They threatened to actually, the U.S. Justice Department threatened to arrest the news director of my network for failing to register. So I think that says a lot about the free press in our country because, as I said, this was never asked of any other network that gets foreign funding, and I would ask why we're such a threat. Why is what we do such a threat? I think it has to do with the fact that we bring people like Randy, we bring people like Ray, someone I've interviewed many times on my show, to talk about global affairs and things like WikiLeaks that for some reason really gets Washington frightened. And I can talk more about all of this later, but I think that's where I'll leave it for my opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. And the one and only Max Blumenthal, my good buddy, who's done about 9 stories on me. Whenever somebody lies about me, he comes out and straightens it out, gets a million tweets, and he's got books out. He just got back with Anya from Gaza, or from Israel, and covering that entire affair. It gets you into a lot of trouble, I know, right? It does get you. You're not their favorite person.
This gets me in more trouble this time.
This probably does.
This is
all right. So, but he's been covering WikiLeaks. He was on the other day. It was a great interview on RT International, I think. And why don't you take it from there, Max?
Well, what do you think as far as a time frame would be best?
How much time to do?
Yeah.
An hour. No. 10 minutes. All right, 10, 12 minutes. All right. And then Dennis. All right.
I just want to thank Randy for bringing me on this panel and for everything he's done for criminal justice and getting this discussion going. And I think he deserves a round of applause. I never would have seen myself sitting on a panel talking about anything Russia related maybe 2 years ago or so, but I feel like the situation has been forced on those of us who don't want to be approaching a new Cold War or possibly a new hot war. And that's really where I stand. It comes from no particular affinity for Russia's contemporary system. And that's about as much respectability politics as you're going to squeeze out of me. That's pretty much my only qualification. I just think we have to look at the history here. I don't know if anyone went into this at any point, but Russiagate comes out of a historical context. Many of you probably might know it even better than I do, but it has to be put on record. I feel like I kind of lived through it growing up, during the Cold War, and then coming out of it and seeing America and its premier intellectuals declare the end of history. But I was at my friend Yasha Levine's place last night. He's done a lot of great writing for the exile from inside Russia during the one of the most pivotal periods leading up to Russiagate, and is now here. And he had a book on his coffee table, Privatizing Russia, by Robert Schleifer and various other economists. This isn't a book about privatizing Russia from a critical point of view. It's how they did it. It was basically their blueprint. Robert Schleifer came out of Harvard. He was installed by Larry Summers, who was one of Clinton's top economists, to basically loot Russia's economy. Andrew Schleifer. Andrew Schleifer?
Yeah, not Robert Schleifer.
Okay.
Sure.
I think so. I know there's also
We've got an extra minute.
Anders Aslan and various other economists came in, and they were actually enriching companies that many of them had a stake in. And, it led to people bartering their goods on the streets, just this feeling of complete chaos, and that this great nation that had once existed was being weakened from the outside and absolutely destroyed. It was like a Mad Max atmosphere. The poor and the old who were depending on their pensions under the Soviet Union and on public benefits, some of them just literally died. There were 3 to 5 million excess deaths. That means almost 5 million people just dropped off the face of the earth. Poverty reached such a point that 90 million people were in poverty. That's up from 3 million people under the Soviet Union. Then we went in when Yeltsin, our guy, was running in 1996 against a communist candidate. And we sent Pete Wilson's consultants, this moderate Republican from California. We sent Pete Wilson's consultants to steal the election. You can see Spinning Boris is a pretty good comedy that's actually pretty subversive by today's standards. You should all watch that great film with Jeff Goldblum and see how we stole the '96 election to keep this project going. All along, we were expanding NATO. George Washington University's National Security Archive has finally produced proof of what everybody already knew, which is that the George H.W. Bush administration lied to Gorbachev and his national security team and diplomatic team and promised that they would not expand NATO beyond Germany. And then we proceeded to do so and put advanced missile systems on Russia's borders, something the United States would never have allowed to take place on its own borders. which leads to this siege mentality, drives the siege mentality. Yeltsin basically becomes too drunk to continue on. He appoints Vladimir Putin, who had been involved in he was actually involved in the privatization project in St. Petersburg, and he was close to the Anatoly Chubais and the kind of guys who had been around Gorbachev and moved into Yeltsin's administration as the partners of the Harvard boys. And everyone thought, oh, Putin's going to be great, he's going to keep this thing going. And if you go back to 2000, 2001, you can find a lot of people, including Bill Browder, praising Putin. What he proceeds to do is start throwing the oligarchs in prison. The oligarchs who wouldn't pay into Russia's economy from Yukos oil and so on. And this sent shockwaves through the national security state in the US and through the foreign policy establishment in Washington. Putin was no socialist. He was basically recentering the economy around a kind of state capitalist model. We responded with color revolutions. In Georgia, removing Edward Shevardnadze first, then moving on to Ukraine with the Orange Revolution. These were revolutions that may have been guided by the CIA, but were carried out through foundations like the Open Society Institute, the National Endowment for Democracy, which is mostly US funded. And we created private media to drive these revolutions. And many of the students who participated in them were earnest, good-hearted people who thought, we just want freedom, we just want what the West has to offer, but they were ultimately used as pawns in a geopolitical game that continued this process of destabilization. At the Munich Security Conference in 2007, Putin stands up with John McCain sitting next to Joe Lieberman in the front row. I think it was Lieberman. Yeah. Joe Mentum, remember that? His only endorsement for president was from the New Republic under Marty Peretz. It was really inspiring. You should go back and look at that video and look at the look on John McCain's face when Putin speaks and he says, we will now act in Russia's national security and national interests, and we will not tolerate expansion on our borders any further. And he basically puts his foot down, and that was, I think, when this process the new Cold War really started to intensify. The next year, Georgia invades South Ossetia, which was Russian territory. We're constantly told Russia invaded. No, it was a Georgian invasion by Mikhail Saakashvili, who himself was a CIA National Endowment for Democracy project, who was egged on by the US. He wound up eating his tie on national television, literally, and got stomped. Another event that sent shockwaves through the national security state in the US. Putin steps aside to Medvedev. After 2008, Medvedev comes in and basically was not particularly popular in Russia. The Libya events really showed how Medvedev's presence actually frightened Russia's military intelligence apparatus, because what Russia did at the UN when there was this critical vote on whether to allow was a no-fly zone in Libya, they abstained. What's Libya now? Open-air slave auctions, the destabilization of North Africa, the rise of Boko Haram, the arms flow out to the south and they flow out to Libya, to Syria. Complete chaos. Putin steps back in, says we got to restabilize. He steps back in after the Magnitsky sanctions come in. Magnitsky sanctions were the product of Bill Browder, someone who's widely hailed as this great Russia expert today. He was at Hermitage Capital. He was one of the oligarchs. I think he's actually the grandson of Earl Browder, who was, yeah, I'm not joking. But he had come to Russia to loot the economy. He owed something like $240 million in taxes. And the standard story, official story, is that his lawyer was beaten to death in a Russian prison, Sergei Magnitsky. If you watch Andrei Nekrasov's film, which is effectively banned in the US, Browder has prevented it from being shown at the European Parliament. You watch this film, you're going to see an entirely different story. This Norwegian filmmaker who is anti-Putin started following Browder around thinking he was going to make this film about this great dissident, and found out that he was an international con artist and vulture capitalist who had basically used his personal fortune to doctor American foreign policy and engineer a 99-to-1 vote in the US, or 99-to-0 vote in the US Congress to sanction Russia unprovoked. I mean, there was no clear provocation for these sanctions. The Magnitsky sanctions deepened the sense of enmity and mistrust and the fear in Russia that the U.S. is coming back for more. And now the Magnitsky sanctions, by the way, have been expanded to the global Magnitsky sanctions, so they're now being applied against Venezuela. They will soon be used to destroy Nicaragua's economy, and so on. So we have to see the repercussions of the Cold War globally. Ukraine is next, the Maidan. Everyone remembers that. It was another color revolution style operation with many of the figures in the Maidan supported by the foundations, National Endowment for Democracy, Open Society Institute, along with the street muscle of right sector, Pravdy sector, who are Nazis. I remember at the time the neocon Jamie Kirchik wrote about Putin's imaginary Nazis in foreign policy. Well, those imaginary Nazis just celebrated an SS battalion last month in the open. They've renamed streets after Stepan Bandera and Roman Shukevich, who were involved in the pogroms of Jews. They actually renamed the street that leads to Baba Yar, the site of Jewish extermination, after Stepan Bandera. So I don't think we can imagine. I mean, they're real. Those Nazis are real. And this is the part of, you have to understand the fear of Russia to have Nazis on their border. And then, of course, Syria. I don't want to spend more than 10 seconds on it, but we enacted a $1 billion program to arm and equip what we consider to be moderate rebels in the only allied state in the Arab League, the only state allied with Russia. So Nazis and jihadists coming at you on your borders or in your in the middle of your allied states, marching on their capitals. Anya mentioned the RT incident with Liz Wall. This, as I wrote for TruthDig, was engineered by the Foreign Policy Institute, which was a rebranding of the Project for the New American Century of Robert Kagan and William Kristol. Same board of directors, pretty much the same sources of funding. Paul Singer, vulture capitalist, pro-Israel vulture capitalist Paul Singer backed this whole operation. Just different faces like Jamie Kirchik, who are the next generation of neocons. And they engineered Liz Wall's resignation on air on RT to not just humiliate RT, but to cast it as this Kremlin influencing operation. And to some extent, they succeeded with the complete support of mainstream US media. I'll kind of end it in the 2016 campaign because we kind of know what happened next. But a lot of these figures, I would just point out that a lot of these figures who were involved with Liz Wall and recruiting her, and who are actually trying to recruit have tried to recruit other figures out of RT, which is something I know about. They centered around the Free Beacon, which is a neoconservative publication in Washington, and Orion Strategies, which is a lobbying firm that represented the Saakashvili government of Georgia. And that group was the original group that funded the creation of the Steele dossier before it was passed on to Perkins Coie, the law firm close to Hillary Clinton and its campaign and the DNC that funded the Steele dossier, the dodgy dossier, which was really used as the narrative basis for Russiagate. That's how the media was able to understand Trump-Russia collusion and Russia's nefarious actions to interfere and meddle in the West. The Steele dossier was dropped, and I'm just going to end it here. The Steele dossier was dropped in January 2017. It was not only funded first by the neocons, then by the Clinton campaign, but James Comey, the FBI director, was planning to pay for it until its existence was exposed in October 2016. And then it was publicly revealed after James Clapper, director of national intelligence, he oversees the FBI and the CIA. He sent James Comey to brief Donald Trump on the existence of the dossier. Then he leaked to Jake Tapper. It was like a handoff from Clapper to Tapper. He leaked to Jake Tapper that Trump was being briefed on this dossier, the dossier that Comey himself had attempted to fund. And from there, it was reported in CNN. Jake Tapper and his team with Carl Bernstein, who's been telling the whole Beltway press corps that they're covering something worse than Watergate, just won an award at the White House Press Correspondents Association, where Randy was thrown out of. They got up on stage and won an award for the story that was basically just leaked to them by Jim Clapper. They just took dictation from the top spook and then won an award for it, which shows how the Beltway press corps is just patting itself on the back for this operation. Then 2 days later, BuzzFeed just releases the full dossier. Trump comes out before the Washington press corps, Jim Acosta badgering him, yeah, what about Russia, what about Russia? And Trump says, fake news, fake news. And then, the whole public is talking about the P tape and all the salacious details, and Russiagate becomes this mainstream phenomenon. So you have a confluence of interests, the never-Trumpers and the Clinton people, and, they want to oppose Trump without talking about the economy or anything, real. And then you have the neocons and the national security state, whose interests I laid out here, and now it's their world and we're living in it.
Max She wants to hear the whole thing. That was great. Thank you. That was really good. All right. So anybody who wants to get out now, get out. But if you have to. So now we're going to continue this, and we're going to go to my good friend Dennis. Has been covering Russiagate from the outset, both on KPFA and in Consortium News. In fact, I thought you'd be on the Consortium News panel because you were very, very close with the founder, right?
Well, and we miss Robert Perriand.
Yeah.
Everybody here familiar with Robert Perriand? It's good to be with you all, and I know you've had this feeling, as I have. I'm watching some idiot on corporate TV just to sort of figure out what they're not going to say today. And somebody says something really stupid, probably Rachel Maddow. And I say to myself, oh, I can't wait to see how Bob Perry reacts to this. And he's not there. So we miss him. Good friend. But Consortium News is alive and well. There is going to be an event tomorrow to celebrate the life and work of Robert Perry, and I recommend you go check it out. If you don't know who he is, you should find out about Consortium News. I have to admit that when I was watching Ray being sort of brutalized, it was also an interesting experience in the nature of what happens now in terms of the flow of information. Because what we were watching was four heavy-set young men rough the hell out of Ray. Who I know you're 78, but I know you've got a 38-year-old's DNA, and you keep marching on. But the interesting part of that, other than being horrified about what was happening to Ray, was the way in which the story was forming. Ray was resisting. The press is reporting it as Ray is resisting, because you hear these four armed guards say, stop resisting, but they're kicking the shit out of him. So do you believe what you see, experience, know, can verify both informationally and heart and mind? Or do you follow the narrative, what they in the corporate media are telling you is happening? Is it what you experience, or is it a big lie? And that's sort of I just want to bring it back to Julian Assange and John Pilger. Why John Pilger spoke up for Julian Assange and how important he is, because it's not the Russiagate frenzy has been very troubling. Of course, the corporate media has made a lot of money on this. I think Rachel Maddow is up to $7 million as long as she shuts up and only talks Russiagate. The network corporate executives have bragged about, yeah, Trump's a bad guy, but boy, did we do well on this story. But the media didn't do well. And part of the real shame are the stories that get missed because the corporate media refuses. Their silence makes them possible. I just want to say a few things about that. As we've seen all this crap on TV and all this time wasted spent on a phony investigation, we've seen emergent famines. We've seen the slaughter, the U.S.-supported Saudi slaughter that's unfolding, that's leading to a famine. We see the beginnings of starvation. We don't see it being reported on. And this, I think, is the great loss when we see all this misreporting non-reporting. And I know Max could talk a lot more thoroughly about this, but I just have to mention, and I'll leave it there, that Rachel Maddow makes it a practice of studying, she says, she implies, all the documents of Russiagate, all the indictments. She knows everything about everything. The minutia, no minutia escapes her. But, and she loves Russiagate, right? And she loves the collusion story. She loves that word collusion. Collusion and the Trump administration. Well, there was collusion. The collusion was between the emerging Trump administration and the Israelis to suppress a pro-Palestinian vote at the United Nations. That's what we missed with this kind of horrific reporting. And my frame of reference, and what the great reporters do, like the one sitting at this table, and the truth tellers, is it comes out of the great reporting of Amira Haas, who works for Haaretz. She has been reporting from the West Bank for many years. You know, she's got more death threats probably than anybody in this world for telling the truth. And what did she say? What is the responsibility of journalists? To monitor the center of power. Monitor the centers of power, whether they be in the government, in the corporation, wherever it's happening, and report back to the people. Monitor the centers of power and report back to the people. That is the one and only job of the people, of the reporters, and their responsibility to the people. I think that's what they used to mean by the fourth estate. And I mourn the loss of journalism, except for the folks who have popped up, who have joined us today, and who keep doing the good work. And Randy's courage in taking on the story of Julian Assange and doing his endless multi-part series that never ends. That, you know,
Like the Twilight Zone.
like that's what it's about. So I thank you, Randy, Ray, everybody at the table, and thank you all.